We'll begin.
Great. I want to thank Rabbi Bolton for inviting me to lead a dialogue with the congregation based on a letter that I have written to Bobby and my two oldest grandchildren, Rachel and Lucas. They were born 11 days apart in 2002 in Seattle and New York, respectively, and both recently entered college. As you can see from the background, I tried to make it so we would feel that we're in the OZ Gallery. And as always, Bobby is at my side, and I have her to thank for helping to choose the art that I'll show along the way. It's great to have an art historian to help you make these selections. So my motivation in writing the letter was to provide my grandchildren with information on the contributions Judaism has made to Western civilization, so that they could take pride in their connection to these contributions, and so they would be better able to explain their religion to their classmates. I've long felt that conservative Judaism has the potential for a special resonance with college students who are beginning their intellectual journey into the big ideas of the place and role of humans in the world. And I have been frustrated by the lack of recognition of Judaism's contributions to these deeply important topics. I've come to the paradoxical conclusion that it is precisely because Judaism's impact has been so profound that it is virtually invisible. Let me briefly try to explain what I mean. When I was in college, one of the more challenging books I read was Ideology and Utopia by the sociologist Karl Mannheim. I make no claim to really understanding the subtleties of his arguments, but I came away with an insight that has been borne out repeatedly in my life experience. And that insight is that if you really want to understand someone, don't ask what they think, find out what they take for granted. That is, what fundamental assumptions do they make about the world that colors the entire way in which they see the world and make decisions? This operates at a level below thought, but dramatically affects thought. And so my principal premise is that Judaism dominates these assumptions among Western thinkers at such a deep level that they are not even recognized. Thus, part of my motivation is to bring those principles to the surface of consciousness and conscious thought so as to identify their rightful source. So while I will not tell you anything you do not already know, I ask you to consider what I say in this context and as if you were about to go off to college to begin your great intellectual awakening. Just to be clear, though, I make no claim that Jews invented ethics. One can read powerful ethical treatises from ancient Egypt long before Moses. What Jews did was to place ethics in a historical and religious framework, record it in writing, and transmit it from generation to generation in an unbroken chain to the modern world. So these are what I wanted to share with my grandchildren as they transition off to college, and I want to share these thoughts about their Jewish heritage with them. And I hope that they'll take pride in knowing how much of modern civilization derives from these fundamental ideas, and also take pride in knowing that Judaism has been continuously practiced longer than any other organized religion in the world, despite, unfortunately, many attempts to prevent its continuity. As the foundational religion for both Christianity and Islam, Judaism's precepts have shaped Western civilization and much of Asian civilization, with billions of people around the world practicing one of these three religions. The Ten Commandments are, of course, iconic contributions of Judaism, but because they are so well known, I'd like to focus more on other foundational ideas that are perhaps less well known and appreciated. According to the Torah, man and women were made in God's image. And from this central Jewish belief comes the profoundly important rockbed principles that all people are created equal, and the equally profound belief that because each of us has a spark of divinity, we must treat all people with respect and protect their dignity. This is one artist's image of what it means to be made in God's image, to be created in God's image. I'm sure each of you might have a different idea of what that means. And I think that that's one of the most powerful fundamental ideas that has framed so much, and again, frames it in a way that it's beneath the surface of conscious thought. In fact, the founders of the US were learned in the Torah, and so the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These are really linear descendants of Judaism's central ethical precept. And of course, recent events in the US show that we are still suffering from the legacy of slavery and bigotry in our own country. According to the Torah, because God rested on the seventh day and declared it holy, humans are created in God's image should also rest each week on the Sabbath. By actually defining a work week and a day of rest, not only for themselves, but also for non-Jews among them, as well as their animals, Judaism gave the world a great gift that has benefited workers the world over for millennia. And here's another image, painting from 1866 by Moritz Oppenheim called Sabbath Afternoon. And I think you can see the benefits of the Sabbath here. At least for the man. Of course, the woman's work is never finished. So I think the dichotomous representation is something to contemplate as well. But certainly the day of rest and the concept of laborers having the opportunity to rest and animals having the opportunity to rest, I think is really, really important to point out. According to Jewish laws, every 7 years, Jews who loan money to other Jews have to forgive the debt. And Jews who have acquired land from other Jews have to give the seller the chance to buy it back for a fair price. Thus, Judaism established the foundational principle to prevent wealth inequality, something that I don't have to tell you, the society we live in now is struggling with. The land is also to enjoy the sabbatical year, and all of the produce that grows by itself that year is free to all, including the animals. And this is a beautiful illuminated illustration on parchment by Barbara Wolf, Rudy Wolf's wife. And it's Psalm 104. And this is like, I chose it for the Jubilee year with Bobby's suggestion, because one of the key points is how the grain brings forth bread from the earth. So this is thinking about the importance of the sabbatical year. One thing I always like to point out is today, Jewish and non-Jewish, religious and non-religious faculty members at virtually every university that I know of in the US seek sabbatical year leaves traditionally every 7 years from their ordinary teaching responsibilities to refresh their scholarship and research and to reflect on their careers. It's one of the most treasured academic benefits, but I suspect that many of your professors may not appreciate from whence the concept arose. According to the Torah, every 50th year is a Jubilee year in which debts were forgiven, land that was sold to others was returned even without payment, and Jewish slaves were set free. The founders, again, were very knowledgeable about the Torah, and they placed the Torah's injunction about the Jubilee year on the Liberty Bell. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. And here it is in Leviticus, right over here. And the Liberty Bell was originally struck in a British firm, a London firm, actually, Leicester and Pack, but then was recast, as you can see, John Pass and John Snow in 1753, and that's the number over here. Taxation is really interesting in the Torah, and I may not have gotten this exactly right, so there may be more learned people who will get some of the more subtleties, but as best I can tell, first it was a half shekel, a modest amount, but that was required of every male, regardless of their income or wealth, to ensure that everyone participated in supporting the communal religious activities. And then on top of this was a 10% tithe, or flat tax, if you will, in modern parlance, on one's produce, ensuring that those who were more prosperous in that year paid a larger amount of money than those who were not as prosperous. And another 10% tithe for the poor, the widow, and the orphan was to be given in years 3 and 6. And it was also important to leave leave the fields, the corner of the fields, for those who didn't have enough food to come and actually glean the food. And widows and orphans, as well as non-Jewish strangers, are repeatedly singled out in the Torah as worthy of special protections, defining the moral imperative of assisting the most vulnerable members of the community, including those who would be the equivalent of immigrants in our country, regardless of their social station or even their religious beliefs. And finally, as indicated on a previous slide, during the sabbatical year, the produce that grew without cultivation was available to all in need, not just the owner. And here's the wonderful painting by Jean-Francois Millet of the Gleaners from 1857. And this might not seem like an overtly political painting, but sometime Bobby will explain to you why this was an incredibly powerful political painting at the time. The Torah recognized the separation of powers and governance. While Moses was able to single-handedly forge the 12 tribes into a nation with a lot of help from God, upon his death, ritual leadership was entrusted to his brother Aaron as the high priest. Civil leadership was entrusted to Joshua as the head of the army. Judicial responsibility was entrusted to the courts composed of learned and impartial judges. And spiritual leadership was entrusted to the prophets, who were inspired by God and had the power to anoint and remove the king. Not only do we have separation of power, but we have enormous numbers of checks and balances in this system, things that we're still struggling with and have obviously not quite gotten right yet. And here's a painting by Pier Francesco Mola from Italy from 1660, showing Aaron as the high priest holding a censer. The Torah doesn't envision a need for a king, but allows the Jews to have one if they decide they want one because other surrounding nations have kings. It actually does not give the king any specific powers, but demands that the king follow the law by making his own copy of the Torah and keeping it with him at all times. It also warns against the king amassing too much wealth or too many instruments of war or becoming arrogant. Thus, and I think this is really the crucial issue for our time, there is a moral force that sits above the king, above the government. And if a government makes immoral laws, they are null and void. Can't say enough about this, and maybe we'll come back to it in discussion. And the Torah demanded justice be done, and that no one is above the law. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. The concept of equality before the law and the impartiality of judges and juries are the prerequisites of a just society. As just law developed, even the high priest, this is, Rabbi was speaking about our Talmud class this year, we discussed the role of the ability to judge the high priest and also the king. That's a little bit more complicated subject, but was subject to being found guilty of a crime and punished. And if looking just at the Torah sources, I'd say I don't see any evidence that anyone, including the king and the high priest, should not be judged rightly if you read this text above. And here's an image of the Sanhedrin. I think it's interesting. Bobby and I were looking through images. It's interesting to look where artists have made images, because we obviously don't have any photographic records. And here's in a very Moorish style. We've also seen ones in which, in a foreshadowing, perhaps, they look more like a Gothic church. So it's interesting to see the different architecture that artists have chosen to depict the Sanhedrin. Uh, in business dealings, I don't think people really appreciate broadly that the specific injunctions in the Torah to use fair measures of weight, length, and capacity in trading. The centrality of business ethics in the Torah, I think, is one of the central and crucial ideas that is really emphasized, and required proper stewardship of the land and respect for trees as part of the ecological imperative. The land belongs to God, and so people are really just stewards of the land. They don't own it. They just till it. And that means that they're able to produce food in their time, but their real responsibility is to pass it along to someone else. As a result, the land also took part in the sabbatical and jubilee years, being unworked so as to replenish the soil. And amazingly enough, even in war, it didn't justify cutting down fruit trees as part of the siege of a city. And here's a beautiful photograph of a pomegranate tree. We selected this one because of the holiday coming up, and Bobby knows of this great artist, Tal Shelkat, who did this photograph in 2010, has photographed many beautiful trees, and it's really very inspiring. And the Torah forbids cruelty to animals, making it not only an injunction for the Jewish people, but a fundamental principle for all nations. And there are many such allusions, and to go with one of them that relates to taking eggs from a nest in the presence of the mother bird, and the sensitivity to that, we show Bird's Nest in Blossom that Bobby identified being connected to William Henry Hunt, and this is somewhere between 1850 and 1860. So, in fact, the tenets of Judaism have set the expectation and standards for communal human behavior. To be kind, to be just, to be honest, to have integrity, to be charitable, to be humble, to recognize the spark of divinity in every person, to uphold the dignity of all people, to do good whenever you can, to confront those who use power for their own benefit, and to protect the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And the central theme throughout more than 3,000 years during which it's been continuously practiced is the encouragement of different learned interpretations of the Torah, buttressed by evidence. This commitment to ever-ending questioning and precision in language and thought has prepared Jews to use the same rigor and creativity in advancing the arts, literature, business, medicine, and the sciences. In college, you will bring exactly these same skills to your studies. You will find that your education in Judaism has prepared you well to bring analytical thinking and creativity to the subjects you choose to study. So the next time you go to Washington, D.C., I suggest you consider visiting the many places where Moses is reverentially referred to in his role as lawgiver, including being one of the 23 marble relief portraits over the gallery doors of the House Chamber in the U.S. Capitol, on the south wall frieze of the Supreme Court room and on the court's east pediment, and in the main reading room of the Library of Congress. Our founding fathers recognized that our country's moral status and commitment to justice rests on the law given at Mount Sinai. And for those who may not be familiar with these, I'll do a very quick guided tour. So this is the east pediment of the Supreme Court, and it has Moses in the center, and Confucius and Solon on either side. And over here, we have in the Supreme Court chamber itself, and the frieze, we have Moses holding the tablets. And in the center, actually, in the U.S. House of Representatives, this sculpture is the centerpiece of an array of important lawgivers out throughout history. And in the Library of Congress reading room, there is this sculpture as well. So let me just see here. Okay, I hope that this will stand you in good stead in respectfully explaining your religion to your classmates who may not know much about it and who may even have misconceptions. I also hope that this extremely brief description of just a few of the elements of Judaism will encourage you to ask your own questions and search out the answers through your own reading, discussions, and ultimately scholarship. As a result, I'm accompanying this letter with a copy of the Torah for you to take with you to college. It will be a valuable reference for you as you delve into your many important new studies. With my deepest love and best wishes for an exciting and stimulating college experience. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Yishar Koach, beautiful, beautiful letter, Barry, and what an explication of our essential pillars of our tradition. You want to take questions from folks now?
Of course.
Wonderful. Who's got the first one? Unmute and chime in.
So where are they going to college?
Okay. Lucas is at Emory, and his interests include music and business. And Rachel's interests include theater and playwriting, and she's at Occidental in LA.
Great.
Hillary, our older daughter, and her husband Leonid, and Rachel and her sister Natalie live in LA. And many of you probably have met Alyssa, our daughter here, and her husband Adam, and probably have met Lucas along the way, and Lucas's brother Hudson.
That's great. And are they going to be on campus this semester, or are they just, I was just curious.
Right now it's a bit mixed. So Lucas is actually at Emory. They allowed the first year class to come, only the first year class, and they're in single rooms. They have many, many restrictions, which needless to say, poses some impediments, but at least they have had a chance to meet people, and he's already made friends. Rachel is doing everything virtual, and they have a very really exciting program focused on LA issues and LA arts. So she's been able to make friends through virtual interactions. So I think the kids are very resourceful, and they're great kids, and we are like quadruple blessed in every conceivable way. So thanks for the question.
Great, thank you.
I have a comment and a question. The comment, a friend of mine recently started a project to read through the Tanakh for the first time. And she said to me, there's very little in the Torah that has to do with ethics. I was so taken aback that I could only come up with one or two examples on the spot. So I very much appreciate the list. You filled out my list with things that I know at some level, but couldn't recall. The question, could one of you type in the name of the photographer for the pomegranate tree?
Yes, so I'll spell it for you, but we'll also send it off. It's Tal, T-A-L, and Shochat, S-C-H-O-C-H-A-T.
And is that an Israeli name?
Yes, yes.
Thank you for the photograph, the artworks as well. They were wonderful, as were your comments.
Well, thank Bobby for the artwork. Let me say, I haven't given you an exhaustive list of the ethical dimensions.
I understand.
Of the Torah, and in fact, one of the reasons that I was eager to do this was that I felt surely that it would encourage you to add to my list. So I'm really interested in identifying. Of course, there are many. There are hundreds, but obviously I've selected ones that I thought would really have the greatest resonance if I were going off to college, and I think that's really one of the places where we need to be focusing, because that's the key to the future of our religion. And I think that that's really why I think it's so important. So please add to my list, send me the list that you come up with, because I think we need to collectively work on this.
Well, the one thing I would add this year is the Jews had the first census. And, you know, it's real relevant this fall and this year.
Okay, right.
I have a question about something that we deal with as adults and the kids that going to college are going to have to deal with, and that is social media. And I'm referring to the Torah's prohibition against idle gossip.
Yes. Well, I'd say that it's, I have not personally read the Torah precisely in that context, but I'll bet that there are a variety of things that relate to social media. The one that immediately comes to mind is talebearing, false witness, truth telling becomes really important. And so anything on social media that doesn't meet that criterion clearly is not going to be consistent with the Tanakh.
I have a question. I was so interested to see that Moses appears in Congress and several other places in the Supreme Court. Do you know how that came about, that they chose Moses, the leader of the Jews, to be in such prominent positions in those buildings?
You have to go back to the year that they were made. Actually, you could probably tell that the House of Representatives goes back only to the 1950s. I did have the dates, but I don't have it right in front of me. When the Supreme Court building was built, that was, I think, early 20th century. So I think that you have to get into a little bit about that, the periods in which the artworks were made. But let me go back and say again, even leaving aside exactly what their religious beliefs are, and there are many books written about the religious beliefs of the founders, but whatever their religious beliefs were, they really knew the Hebrew Bible. This was not something that was alien to them. And that's why I say, when I could just see Jefferson sitting down and writing those words, and those words are flowing right out of the Torah, and they're flowing into his head. And they're flowing out onto that piece of paper, and they're now affecting the world for the last 200 some odd years in a way that is so profound, it's hard to even imagine. So it wasn't like it was a struggle for them to recognize the foundational aspects of Jewish thought.
Barry, let me take that one step further, if you will. Are you worried as a grandfather? Are you worried as grandparents with what we know of what's going on college campuses, everything from BDS to the need for the Jewish Lawfare Project, which protects, under the civil rights movement, only in the 1990s, which protects Jewish civil rights when it comes to being able to ask for holidays off or espouse Jewish ideas about Israel and about the centrality, that we have folks who are really concerned about campus and presence of Judaism and Jewish people, a little different, both of those.
Yes.
Are you concerned at all that there's an attack on the place of Jews on campus, or does that really not concern you? Do you see that as exaggerated in our media and on social media? What's your take on that these days?
Yeah, so number one, support Hillels, because I think that they are a crucial contributor to life on campuses, and in fact, not even just Jewish life on campuses. I graduated from Columbia, and we stay connected to the Columbia Hillel as well as the Stony Brook Hillel, but they have a great Shabbat dinner out to Columbia, in which Jewish kids invite non-Jewish kids to the Shabbat dinners, and they take the leaders of the student government to Israel every year. So I'd say, number one, Hillels. Number two, take an example from what I'm trying to do, and that is to prepare Jewish students so that they know what in fact they can say about their religion. I think that's by far the single greatest thing we can do for them at many levels. To be frank about it, I think, as I said at the beginning, I think conservative Judaism has so much to offer in this regard. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways at this, but I think trying to put it in the framework of intellectual development, I think is one of the ways that will be very, very helpful. I may be wrong, but that's what I would put my emphasis on, because I think it is all about a marketplace of ideas. So let me maybe I'll share for one more minute. And any other question? Because I have one thing that I thought I would, in preparation for this, if I can share my screen for one more minute. Let's see if I can find this. So what I'm showing you here, I went back to, as I say, I went to Columbia, and I took the core curriculum in 1962, which was, and I'm showing you the table of contents from the key source book. This was the source book, and Columbia's core has been famous for 100 years. In fact, they just celebrated the 100th year. And you can see that it begins with Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero, even though the Torah was written centuries before any of them. And as we all know, monotheism won out over paganism as a way of interpreting the world in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's where the battle needs to be, in the marketplace of ideas. I also will comment that you can see we only have, in the next group of readings that we have, this is where we finally have a Jewish writing. And I must say, I went back and reread it last week, and it's a very esoteric letter. I'm sure many on this Zoom probably know this much better than I, but it's all about how do you figure out if somebody is a false Messiah. And there's almost nothing that I spoke to you about tonight is in this writing as the one and only Jewish source in my source book that purports to be the source book of Western civilization. So I don't think we've done a very good job. I'll put the blame back on me. I think we have not done a very good job of doing what I said at the beginning, which is to make evident where, in fact, Jewish thought has made a contribution. And I'd rather work from that standpoint than getting into painful political battles, because those often don't turn out well.
Well, I think the power of being grandparents who writes to their grandchildren and say, these are important words for you to consider, and this is an important document, this Torah, and let's start from this ability we have to convey the seriousness of our tradition, the ethics that are embedded within our texts, is a wonderful place to start. And to have informed and educated folks out there with core sources, primary sources, and add them to the great library of civilization that you've just shown in terms of the table of contents is so essential. We might be in an age where a library of writings about Western civilization are falling by the wayside, but that's another discussion. That E.D. Hirsch had a lot to say about in the newspapers this weekend, arguing for a core curriculum again of standard texts that could indeed form a more, let's say, ethical society. And you have some great suggestions here in terms of the curriculum that we ought to be reading. Which copy of the Chumash or the Tanakh are you sending them with? Because I didn't see the slide, and I'm so curious as to which one of these you're sending.
I sent him Eis Chaim
It's time.
because it's portable.
Wonderful. There's a question that came in on the chat that I'll amplify from Linda. So which kind of cause, if we're thinking about tzedakah, might the Torah suggest if we were looking towards Torah ethics? And Barry, I think you identified some of the core verses about tzedakah. Do you want to take that question?
Sure. I think if you just follow what they keep saying, it's the vulnerable people. It's all about vulnerable people. It's the orphan, it's the widow, it's the stranger, it's the people who are marginalized. So I'd say that's where clearly we want to begin. I'll immediately say, of course, we also have to support the Levites and the upkeep of the synagogue. So clearly, clearly, I want to make that message absolutely clear. That tzedakah also requires sustaining the community, and the community is the synagogue. So I'd say if you keep those general ideas, you can't go wrong.
I think that's a good moment for me to make a commercial break. Leslie, will
Barry.
you unmute Leslie Palmer and tell the community also about how you could invest a little time this year and what the Chesed Committee has in terms of an opportunity this Elul identified for us?
Sure, I'm happy to. I also do have a question for Barry. I'm curious if you have any feedback from Lucas and Rachel, if they're going to engage in some dialogue with you about this initial letter. Yes, so we have a volunteer opportunity. We want to bring it to everyone's attention tonight because it requires some immediate action if you're interested. Encore Community Services is a nonprofit in Midtown that's serving seniors, and need for their services exploded with the pandemic. They're serving Meals on Wheels and doing other interventions for a couple thousand seniors in Manhattan. And they're looking for volunteers to make weekly friendly calls. It's not a big commitment. You're matched with a senior and agree to check in on how they're doing and report back to Encore. So if you're interested, please check the e-blast and reach out to Encore. There's contact information to sign up for an orientation on Tuesday. Thanks for this opportunity to promote.
Just say I see in the chat someone asked about having a copy of the letter. As soon as we're finished, Rabbi Bolton said he'd be happy to distribute the full letter. I obviously had to select some excerpts, so there's a little bit more in there.
Barry, definitely will get that posted on the website, and I won't send it immediately, but we'll be posting it with a, if you missed it, click here, and so you'll be able to read it. Did you send it already, and did you get a reaction from your grandchildren, I guess was Leslie's question, or how do you plan on, delivering it and when?
So I have delivered it. Both of them said that they learned a lot from reading it. We didn't get much further than that, but I have a feeling that we'll be coming back to this periodically. So I think I'll have lots more opportunity to work on each of the things as they come up and become important in their lives and in their intellectual development.
Barry, we have on our shelf a copy of the Hertz Chumash from 1959, when my great uncle, my father's mother's brother, bought 6 copies and sent them to each of his nieces and nephews and inscribed it that we should learn, love, and live our ancient heritage. And I've got my family's copy. And then I have another Hertz Chumash my father gave me. I think I was in my early 30s. And he hand-lettered the priestly blessing inside. These are really precious possessions because of people wanting to pass down that heritage.
Right. Well,
So,
as you know,
good for you.
immediately,
Abby, it's Francine. I wanted to make a comment. I don't know how to use the chat. Can I,
Go
can
ahead,
I,
Francine.
can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Barry, you asked, you said, are there any other ethical things we might think of? And one of the things I thought of is Abraham arguing with God that nobody is above the law, not even God, and that it's okay to expect just behavior even from the highest authority in the universe.
speaking truth to power.
Right, absolutely.
But a very dangerous thing to do, but God bless him.
It teaches us we can do it.
Paradox. And Alyssa just wrote in the chat that Lucas took the letter off to college with him. And so I think that that's definitely a sign that he thought it would be of value to him going forward to be able to refer to. So that I think is another step along the way. But as I say, you know, we immediately after we read the Shema, we read the importance of teaching our children. And I think that the centrality of that obligation and responsibility is really what has allowed us to go from generation to generation. And we each fulfill that in our own way and look for ways to do it. And I think the more creativity we bring to that, the stronger we'll be.
Amen. Amen. Well, Barry, it's a blessing to be able to sit and learn with you.
Bobby in here now a little bit more.
Right, I was going to say, and we're so grateful that we had both the wisdom of Torah and the artful presentation. And your Chevruta is indeed an example to your family and our family, our Or Zarua family. The commitment to Jewish wisdom, to studying Jewish sources, to bringing your life experiences to the Talmud on Wednesday evenings, to synagogue on the Sabbath, and to moments like these in our chaburas. And we are challenged, each of us, to now find the sources that amplify our connections to our tradition. And some of them may be exactly the same, and some of them may be a little different. Some of the stories and narratives that animate us as Jews are shared indeed, and some of them are unique to our personalities. And they spark action in us as much as they spark intellectual reflection. The idea that we should add more to the great canon of civilization, the texts of civilization, tonight, an important and essential point in a time when watching the 30-second TikTok on social media has become, this source of inspiration. For the question of where we are with virtual wisdom, the Torah might have been passed down in some form of technology, but to go back to our sacred books and to invest ourselves as students is much different than just a quick moment of entertainment. And religion is not about entertainment as much as it's about really helping us realize our most sincere goals as human beings and as humanity. And as Jews in the world, we have a job to do still. As you said, the longest practicing people on earth when it comes to exporting our values as much as just lighting our Shabbos candles. And tonight we are getting prepared for our days of awe, which even during these crazy times when life is so different because of the pandemic, we are finding deepest inspiration in exploring our sacred texts. It's a good week to come to morning services at 7:15 to hear the tunes of Slichot. You'll find Barry or Bobby there too. And you can make sure you're registered for all our High Holy Day services, either to get the right link or to set up your prayer space at home and to make that an endeavor this week, to make sure you're going to have physical space for inspiration within your home. Such an important element of our tradition is the home. And this year we're learning lessons about being at home and bringing our Judaism into our lives at home. And there is, of course, up and coming between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur this year, the way to fulfill our obligation to learning together and to feel satisfied that Francine will still be able to address us. Francine Klagsburn will be giving her talk on Thursday evening about finding meaning in the book of Job this year. And we're looking forward to that. A daytime noon lecture the day before that on Wednesday with Dr. Daniel Gordis. So we are connected. We are committed to our tradition, the ethics we learn from it. We are committed to praying together and to learning together. This Chabura, Barry, kicks off another year of Chabura. And we are going to commit to having more of these so that congregants can present Divrei Torah and letters of their own, perhaps, or other reflections on our sources. If you're interested this year in presenting a Chabura, or a Chabura, as we call it, please be in touch with me. Sometimes I'm out seeking the right presenters, but sometimes folks have ideas about Torah and texts that they're trying to crystallize and shape up, and I'm willing to help and be a study partner. So I want to thank you again, Barry, for sharing so personally, and Bobby, Toda Rabah, and for getting us on this path towards the most meaningful high holy days we can have this year in 5781.
Thank
Toda
you.
Rabah.
Thank you. Yasher Koach. Just
Yasher
one.
koach.
Yasher koach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Beautifully done, Barry. Thank you.
Great, as always, thanks.
Thank you, Barry and Bobby. It was great. And I loved your art, Bobby. It pulls me back into wanting to do more in the world of art. If I could find the place.
Okay, I think we can leave.
And thank you for the book. We got it this weekend. It's great.
Thank you, Pat. Join our committee, Pat.
Okay.
The book is wonderful.
Let's hope we can get into the building to do things like that in the near future.
Barry, Yasher Koach. So having us, in recent years just sent 2 kids to college, I love the content of what you said. And just on a very basic level, we're sending our kids off to college, and in a way they're going to live in this real bubble that's very unigenerational. Right, it's very opposite to the values that we have as Jews and the values we have at Or Zarua of creating an intergenerational community. By and large, college students, outside of their relationship with their professors, they're living all with college students. Activities are student run. If you're lucky enough to be in the Jewish community, you might interact with the rabbis, but by and large, it's very unigenerational. And so I also just love the example that you set. As we send them off to college, let's remember the wisdom of our parents, our grandparents. And just because you're sort of going out into this unigenerational bubble, that's only a small sliver of the intellectual heritage and curiosity we should cultivate our interests in. And so I was really inspired in that way as well.
Well, thank you. And it's also a guide to behavior when confronted with complex problems that are new without the support systems that you usually can turn to. It's important that they know that there are sources that are fundamental principles from which they can derive their own conclusions about what that means for their behaviors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks so much again.
Sure.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Just thank everybody for coming. And if you have any questions, please send me an email. I'm easy to find. Okay. Bye-bye now.
Shana Tova.